Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. What will the Albanese Labor government's new vehicle efficiency standard mean for Australian motorists, and what is the significance of this reform after a decade of inaction?
Call to the order. The Leader of the Nationals. Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member very much for his question and for his very active leadership on matters of climate change in this House. And, Mr Speaker, the honourable member asked me what it means for Australian motorists that this government will introduce vehicle efficiency standards. And what it means is after 20 years of governments promising Australian motorists and consumers to get better standards and better choices, this government will deliver it. This government will deliver after 20 years of failed promises. 5 decades after the United States introduced standards, Australia will catch up. Years after Japan, China, Saudi Arabia, India, New Zealand and Canada introduced standards, Australian motorists will catch up. 6 years after the previous coalition government promised to introduce the standards and consulted on details and then squibbed it, Australia will catch up. $4 billion of unnecessary expenditure on petrol and diesel over the last 6 years as a result of the previous government knowing that they should have introduced the standards but then not proceeding. Australian motorists will finally catch up. Now, the Minister for Transport and I held a press conference just before question time with Tesla and Toyota. With Tesla and Toyota, and the opposition front bench says Bonnie and Clyde. That's what they think of these Australian companies. They have quoted Toyota at every press conference. At every press conference, they've quoted Toyota, and every question time we can quote Toyota today, where the chief executive thanked the government for the engagement and said it's time for Australia now to move on and implement these standards, Mr Speaker. So,
Member for Lyons.
So, Mr Speaker, a broad cross-section of the motoring industry, joined by peak motorist groups, the NRMA, RACW, RACQ, for example, who actually represent motorists, Choice, who represents Australian consumers, now joined by the Motor Traders Association and the Automotive Dealers Association at the press conference, backing the government's position, have now called for the broad cross-section of the parliament to pass the legislation. You know who's opposed to legislation? The Liberal and National Party and Advance. They're the two groups that are left opposing the legislation. It's not too late. It's not too late for the opposition to reflect on their position. The Minister for Transport will introduce the legislation tomorrow. There's a chance for the opposition to say, OK, Toyota backs this. The Australian automotive dealers back it. The Motor Traders Association backs it. Hyundai backs it. The NRMA backs it. RACW backs it. The RACQ backs it. Maybe we should back it. Maybe we should stop being so negative. Maybe we should do what we promised to do in 2016 and 2017, that the Cabinet, that the Leader of the Opposition was a member of, decided and authorised the ministers to progress. Maybe it's time to catch up and actually be positive for once. Actually support the government and support Australian motorists for once.